Thank you all for coming. This was an idea born from what One Nixa does. They're a great resource to the community for education, adult education classes. If you've never been on the website, it's really great. You can see their banners right here. There's a QR code at the bottom. If you're a military veteran, I'd like to honor you guys first. Would you raise your hand? Okay. And over here we have, and tell us what branch you're in.
I'm a DARE student of mine.
Yeah, Brian Castillo's in the Marine Corps.
Marine Corps.
And right here.
U.S. Army. U.S. Army.
Okay.
And Army Iraq veteran, correct?
Army Desert Storm.
Desert Storm, sorry, Desert Storm veteran. Okay, awesome. Of course, this course dedicated to all of you. And tomorrow is your very special day, and I heard you get to eat free at E29. If you guys take advantage of that on Veterans Day, all the veterans that come in and show ID, you get to eat for free. So what started this for me was my father was a World War II veteran, and his name was Bill Forgey, and he lived in the Ozarks, Florida area for all of his life. And can we switch to the first slide?
Okay. Sure.
And he graduated from Ozark High School in May of 1941, and he was actually working at the Northrop Grumman plant after high school, and I think I have this picture of him, I couldn't find it, of all these guys from all over the county that were his age, and they found out that if you got trained, I think it was the beginning of OTC in Springfield, you got trained on aircraft assembly, and they built fuselages and hydraulics for B-25 aircraft at the Northrop Grumman plant, almost in the Kansas City campus. They would drive up during the week and work on their jobs, and then on the weekend they'd come home and farm with their parents because there was a lot of farms in Christian County at that time. And on December 7th of 1941, they were driving back up on a Sunday. They shared an apartment together up in Kansas City. And they were stopped while getting fuel and told to go home because the word had got out, Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It was a heck of a fight, and a lot of wounded, a lot of people trapped, and they were sent home. So him and his friends decided, because of their age and their fitness at that time, and their youth, that they were going to enlist the next day, and he enlisted in Springfield with several friends in the Army. And so I mentioned that in the second paragraph. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Thanks, Mike. And this is a picture of him. This was after basic training. He took his basic training at Fort Hood in Texas. And I was told by my cousin that photographs were kind of rare back then, and your family had to have a little bit of money to get a photograph at that time. Still recovering from the Depression. I always thought that was interesting, and I have two of these today of him, and we'll go to the next one. These are some pictures of him. He ended up, by the time they could get everyone, there were so many people at that time that were enlisting. So it took a while to get everybody trained. And the training, if you've ever seen a training graduation photo of that era, they're like this tall, and they're this long, and they all have wrinkles in them. My father's was the same. I found it after he passed away. And they rolled them up, and they kept them in a closet, just like they did their uniform for 30 years. When they came home, they didn't want to be reminded of what they had to do overseas. And so they got their uniform dry cleaned and sat in the closet for at least 30 years. Very interesting. It was a different time back then. So they just wanted to forget about it. And my dad wrote letters. I've got several letters here that he wrote. He fought the Japanese in the Philippines after MacArthur came back with the 37th Infantry Division, and what got me interesting was a patch that he had, and I saw it when I was very young, and I thought it was a Japanese patch. I'll show you in a second. But on that photograph on the left, that's him in the Philippines with another Christian County guy, and I think his name is Baumgartner. And then in the middle, he's the one with the uniform. At his sister Maxine's house. His sister Maxine Blue worked here at Nixa for at least 30 years. at the Nixa Bank, which is now part of the Assembly of God Church, which I think they didn't change their name, haven't they?
I think it's Central Bank.
Yeah, Central Bank. And she worked there a long time. She was older than him by a year or two. And he's at her house. I got several of those photos, and that's a picture of him with his sister Maxine on the right, and they went to church. Trying just back to basic training on the beat. And then what got me interested, we'll go to the next slide, is patches. And my dad had a small stack of patches, and I learned later that it was patches from guys that he knew that were in the service, guys he grew up with, guys from around the Christian County, probably Greene County area. And that is my collection. And notice actually a huge board. It was really too big to bring in here. But those are all World War II era infantry division patches. We had the most infantry divisions during that time than any other time in history, because it was a World War, very large World War. And that case actually came from the church in College of the Ozarks. If you remember the boards that had the rain, it was near a river, they could see this type of animal there, and that's what they want to put on the patch. If you look at the right panel, the second row from the top on the left, does that look like the Statue of Liberty? That's a New York Infantry Division. So a lot of them were history from around that area. When I found this book, I could really look that stuff up. I'm like, wow, I love this. And then I bought another book, and it had the history of how the patches were made. And I brought a couple examples here. This one is 1st Armored Division, but it's World War II. The World War II patch is cut off at the fabric where it has this type of edge. And the man that designed this was named Shifley, so they called it a Shifley edge. And modern patches loop around the edge because they found out after a while, especially in combat, these would fray. So newer patches have threading that go completely around and protects the edges. So it's something I learned there. And World War II patches will always have something like this on the back. See all that white thread? The Army first, and most of the military made their own patches, and they had what that's called green thread on the back. But the military is good at figuring out costs and doing evaluations for everything, and they realized we're making our own patches and it's costing us more money if we get civilians to do it. So white thread was cheaper, so they went with white thread on the back, and that's called snow. It looks like snow on the back of the patch. So if you have one that has the green thread, that's original, made by the military, they're more expensive. So something I found that I thought was very interesting at the time. And just the history of all of them. This particular case of patches is all the armies and army groups. And if you remember, you may have seen movies or shows on General George Patton. His was 3rd Army, the first army group that he led right here. And then 5th Army started with this patch with the 5 stars, and when they went to this, and there's history behind the symbol in it. 6th Army, my dad was in the 6th Army right here. 7th Army, they advertised that 7 steps to heaven, going down 7 steps to hell. So they all have different meanings and monikers and so on, all the way to the 10th Army. Active First Army Corps, 2nd Army. And this means Army Ground Forces. This patch right here, you might see a uniform with that. And this tab I added, since these were Army patches, it's not the right time period for these patches because these are World War II patches. This is a Vietnam, and it linked up the combat shirt left side pocket. But I thought it looked good there because it's Army patches. So these patches are very significant. These are very hard to find. Some of these are authentic, some are remade, but these are all the Phantom divisions. If you remember in World War II, Operation Fortitude that came out, and they actually hired, and they actually put them in service, Army, Hollywood set designers, and prop masters. And they made fake airplanes, fake tanks. They made them out of plastic, and they blew them up. They had big air compressors, and they blew them up, and they lined them up so it looked like they had more aircraft, more tanks, more vehicles, and they set them up in rows out in the English countryside so the German spies or reconnaissance aircraft could see them. And so they made fake patches. They wanted the Germans, in the air camp theater, they wanted the Germans to think that they had more airborne and infantry divisions than they had. So they would make these patches, and they would see who was going on leave, and they're like, hey, replace your division patch, your airborne patch with one of these. It'll make them think the German spies are running around, make them think we have more people there than we actually do. And it actually worked. That was called Operation 42. And these are all fake divisions. They were not real. They did not train, they did not fight. They were real soldiers that did fighting, but they would never go into combat with one of these on, but they put them around town. Very interesting story. Very, very hard to find.
Yes, do you know if they ever shot anyone that was fake? The military vehicles or planes?
I think some of it got strafed, but it's interesting. The Germans never caught on, because I remember watching an old video of a guy walking over, and he kicks this tank and it flips completely over because it was just plastic in air is all it was. And he did it because the air valve was on the bottom of the tank, and he was there. But they were so light that they had to weight some of them down. Of course, from the air at several hundred feet, you're not going to see that. So it was interesting how they just ought to do that. You know, the most fascinating thing, and I have studied and studied and studied history and battles, military history, and the astounding thing compared to what we have today, our technology, is World War II. All of the entire World War II was fought without a single computer. Now, the beginning of intelligence when it came to computers, there's a good movie out there, I can't think of the name of it, where there was a guy that was just an expert mathematician. I think he was from England, and he developed the first system to decipher German military codes and figure out what the Enigma machines, how they worked. And they were extremely complicated. And he built this humongous computer system to figure out how that worked. But no one had ever worked with a computer, so they didn't know how it was going to run. They had to experiment with it as they went on. It actually ended up working, and they were able to break codes. But at the same time, they got an actual Enigma machine from a World War II submarine. The British captured it. At the same time, they put that together, and they were able to figure out the codes. That's one of the reasons that we got the edge on the Germans during World War II. It's probably a news slide. So what started my fascination, besides these patches, I remember my dad had a little pair of military earplugs on this dresser, and he had a bunch of junk on top of his dressers. And I was either 3 or 4 years old, and I went and asked him, I said, Dad, did you use those earplugs in the military? And this is my dad's hammer, and he said, nope, first shot flew through your ears. And he was in artillery. So, that would be true. You probably wouldn't hear anything for a while after the first camp. And he was trained after his basic training in 57 millimeter out tankers, because he didn't know that they were sending his group to the Pacific Theater, Philippines, fight the Japanese. And he had several friends that went. He wrote all about this. I have his whole military history written down. I was lucky that he did that. And all his letters, as I showed to his sister and his parents. Here's one to his sister, Maxine Blue. The addresses, aren't they interesting back then? Just Box 165, Ozark, Missouri. Or some of them just said Maxine Blue, Ozark, Missouri. And it made it their house. I don't know how, but it did. Of course, a lot less people back then. And he signs this one, Private William P. Forgey, is our serial number, headquarters company, 1st Battalion, 148th Combat Infantry Regiment. This one is from California. I had one I wanted to share. I think this was it. And these are very delicate, but my dad's handwriting was exquisite. You can kind of bring this around. I mean, he had the biggest fingers I've ever seen, but he could write. I mean, it was super, super neat.
CJ.
In 1945. Yeah. Just amazing. And most of his writing was like that. It was just unbelievable how neat he could write. I could not write that neat. I was always jealous of him, but it's good to see that.
The parody.
So, when I found these letters and I started reading them, it was interesting because to his sister, oh yeah, we went out and took a Jeep without permission and tried to find a bar, turned it over, went too fast around a curve. My dad was scared to death when they turned that Jeep over and no one got hurt, but he thought they ruined the Jeep. But they were so well built, they just flipped it over, it started back up, and they took off. You know, and to his parents, he would never share those. He goes, oh yeah, we haven't seen combat days, and they're feeding us well, and everything is fine. But to his sister, he cut out what was really going on. And this one I found very interesting. He wrote to his sister with the history of this area. Paul, I think you'll like this. He writes to his sister, I got some spare time on my hands this afternoon. A little too hot here, of course, in the Philippines, to sleep, so I'm answering your letter. You said it was very hot in your letter back home. And I got kicked out of being camped here. Oh, I got a kick out of being camped here because there's some cornfields next to me. It's the first time I've ever stayed so close to a cornfield and not have to cultivate it. That's kind of my dad's humor again. I don't see how some guys get so many leaves. He wrote, Harry Ford Ball was home last summer, wasn't he? I can't quite understand why Don Harper hasn't had a leave before now. You know, Clifford helped me, but I don't seem to recall the other guy's name either. His mom gave me a speech once for cutting on her little son. I don't know what that meant, cutting. I don't think I actually meant cutting, I was just teasing or something. And I guess he was too much of a sissy to do his own talking, so he told his mother she chewed my dad out. I'm guessing high school maybe.
It was
Yeah, so at the end here he says, well, what can you expect from a Nixaite? So I shared that with someone in a librarian at the school I was in at the time. And they said they were Nixa person, and they said that it runs deep. Doesn't it, Paul? The rivalry runs deep, so I thought that was kind of cute. On the ship out. I heard about it because isn't it amazing?
Yeah, my grandfather lived
Really
in
nice.
World War II and has a brick outside of the building
Yeah.
with his name on it.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, the walkway. I first learned about it, and it had just changed names. It was put together by a historian. He was one of the first ones that I saw that interviewed World War II veterans when they came back. I mean, maybe one of the only ones at the time. And his name was Dr. Stephen Ambrose, and he was a professor of history at New Orleans University. And he would go visit veterans, and they always gave him something. They gave him a helmet or something that they had picked up, and he was fascinated by that. So finally his wife said, Stephen, no more, our house is full. So he had to figure out what to do with it. So he got with some business owners that he knew in New Orleans, and they opened up a museum. And they called it the D-Day Invasion Museum. That's how it started, actually. And by the time I got to go there, and this was several years ago, we went on spring break from school here in Nixa, and I just decided I was going to go. I called for reservations on the way driving down. I rented a car, and I took some of my dad's stuff. And so I learned it was very expensive to stay in New Orleans, so I had to stay outside of town. We'd drive in, traffic was horrendous. I loved it. I walked in and I was amazed. They had the train car that you could get in. It's got hydraulics on it that knows. People are telling stories of their service from World War II. Just one of the things. And I asked if I could meet a person that worked at the museum. What are the historians there called, Paul?
They're old.
Kieran, thank you. I watched talk to Kieran, and he said, I'll see, it may be a day or so. So I went back the next day, and they emailed me and said, yeah, Loeb, this guy will reach it. And I got to talk to him for probably a minute, and they're busy running around doing all kinds of stuff. They were building a PT boat and all this thing stuff. And he said, I want to put you in touch with my photo archivist, Lowell Baxley. And I'm like, what's a photo archivist? I didn't know. So this guy was great. He took me up to this room. This was their private library in the National World War II Museum, where they look up information. If they get given stuff, they start researching it. They're looking at it, and I was just fascinated by that. Because there are volumes of books, if you notice, they're the same color and the same style. Time Life did several series of World War II books, and I noticed they were numbered. I took pictures of them, and I'm like, oh, a new collecting hobby. I gotta find these. So I've been, and you can go to used bookstores and you can find this stuff. It's difficult sometimes, or it shows, but I was able to collect some of the things that they had. Had some really interesting artifacts. I don't know if you guys noticed the Dare backpack sitting on the table. And I got to share my father's story and talk with him about other things. And Lowell liked me so much, he took me to another level of the museum. That's like 4 stories actually in the middle. And he started showing me trays of weapons that they used for display. Actually, real World War II weapons. They had a German drawer, Italian drawer, Japanese drawer, and he had a pair of white gloves with him, I noticed, and he said, you can pick one thing that you would like to hold, and out of all these drawers, and these were cabinets that were like, super lock cabinets, heavy drawers, fire retardant stuff. They were super expensive. And pick out one weapon of all of them. When I picked the German MG-42 machine gun. And I got to hold it, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. So I couldn't stop thinking about that. I couldn't even sleep. I was so excited. So I just want to throw that in there and add some stories. Next slide.
By the way, Stephen Ambrose became very famous at best-selling author.
He did. In fact, I was going to bring some of his books, and I kicked myself for not doing it. When I talk to a school group, I normally do that. He did his own book on D-Day, but like I said, he had early research from other people. You probably know him as best from Band of Brothers, and he spent a lot of summers away from college going overseas because he found someone that said, hey, you need to check this company. They did the most amazing things in the war. And that's how that was written. He wrote, and then it was produced as a television series. Tom Hanks was doing Castaway at that time, and Steven Spielberg called him and said, hey, I've got an incredible story here. We need to meet with Stephen Ambrose. And Stephen Ambrose was actually kind of an advisor on Saving Private Ryan. Now, Saving Private Ryan is a very significant movie because that's where veterans, people looked at veterans differently. When it came out, people didn't realize they were really touched and moved by that movie. Now, what happened was the sound and the picture quality got so good in that opening fight scene on the beach that you thought you were there. There's bullets buzzing around your head in the theater. It was just insanely loud. And there's a neat story behind that I found out. That Steven Spielberg, of course, produced that movie. And it ties to my father as well, that you saw the picture of her there. And my father made a lot of brother series. It's excellent. If you notice, at the beginning of some of those episodes, they actually interview the veterans. Well, I found out that they, to get the research for the movie, they went and interviewed the veterans just to check the stories that they had heard from other people or other veterans. And while they're filming these guys, they said the family showed up and they knew that Grandpa or Dad was in the war, but they never knew exactly what they did. So when those people showed up, you couldn't see it because they had it darkened out in the background when they interviewed these guys. There were family members just dying to know what they actually did. So I think after Saving Private Ryan, that interest just came. Hey, this is some pretty amazing stories. And you know what most of the veterans say about the things that they've done overseas? They say, it wasn't that bad, it wasn't that big deal. It was a huge deal. They were doing things that young men, 18, 19, 20, some 15 and 16, you asked them to do, was just unbelievable. And of course, from that World War I that started PTSD, we know a lot more about it now, but there was a lot of studies done about World War II. One of them was, he was a law enforcement trainer. He was a retired lieutenant colonel. and he was from Arkansas. His dad was chief of police, and he wrote a book called On Combat and On Killing. And he was the first I learned about it, the studies they did. They would interview soldiers after battle and figured out who actually pulled the trigger in combat, who had to do a bayonet charge, and they followed. And you don't hear about it, but there's research about that. That's how we know about PTSD, because the time they took to study that war, it was so large. Just a very interesting thing. So, the story behind Saving Private Ryan is very interesting. Before it was shown out in theaters, Steven Spielberg called Stephen Ambrose, Dr. Ambrose, and said, "Hey, I want you, I will fly you out, I will limousine, whatever food or drink you want, I'll provide it. I want you to see this movie before we cut out the cover." And Stephen said, "I'm busy, I'm getting ready to leave for a trip, I'm researching a book, I'm going overseas, I can't do it." So he said, "Fine, I'll bring the movie to you. Where's the closest theater?" So he told him he had it under guard, shipped to this theater. Just Stephen Ambrose is watching this. And the beginning scene is what? 15 minutes or something, that beginning opening scene on the beaches. Unbelievable. Yeah.
First time I'd ever been shown.
Yeah, it's so moving. So after 5 minutes of that, of the beach scenes, our guys trying to advance the beaches in Normandy, Stephen jumped up and said, "Shut the movie off." He had to go outside and smoke a cigarette. It bothered him so bad and as soon as it was over, he was supposed to call Steven Spielberg and tell him, and this theater was under guard. No one else could go in, no one else was supposed to watch what was going on, because it hadn't been shown. And so after the movie, he got a limousine right there and back to his home. And he called him and he said, "Hey, what do you think?" I said, "It's great, don't change a thing." He said, "No, I want you to be picky. You're a military historian. What is fact and what's not fact?" And you know the one thing he said was not real about that particular movie was Tom Hanks. He said they would never put a man of Tom Hanks' age in charge of a group of soldiers on D-Day. They only wanted young men for D-Day, especially Omaha and Utah beaches. Anyone know why? I finally figured it out when I watched the Band of Brothers episodes. Anyone know why? What? That's exactly right. Some of those Band of Brothers veterans said, Don Malarkey said, "I would never take the risk that I did later in the war that I did on D-Day when we jumped the night before. Never take those risks." Dwight Eisenhower was a genius, because he was in charge of that whole invasion. And he writes in his book, great books by the way, his memoirs, that I only picked young soldiers and young officers to lead them because they take more risk than older people. Older people like, "Now wait a minute, I've been through this. I'm not going to hard charge right in the middle of this machine gun nest. Let's try to flank it, go around, and let's develop a different fight." And that was a very interesting part of history, that he only wanted young soldiers and commanders in there to get the job done. And that's what it took. They take a lot more risks, as Dr. Cole said, than older people. So, very interesting. All right, so here's a picture of me, my first trip to the National World War II Museum, and I took my dad's photo, the one that I took a picture of. It was done from Duncan Studios in Springfield. Paul, do you remember? I guess that was up in the downtown area, probably, I guess, where it was taken. And I always wanted to find actual Steve, the artillery piece my dad was trained on. And he kind of cut it off. He was a World War II veteran. Right where the picture is taken behind him was a fully restored PT belt. If you go in the main area, and it's over on the left. And I was looking at this, and I was busy with this guy, and I showed him the picture, and he said, "Well, stand up, let me take your picture." But he cut off the cannon, so I added the other picture so you could see it. And it's what my dad was trained in. So my dad, I was lucky, as you saw, he wrote a lot of things down, and he said during his travels overseas, he knew that when he was shipped to, of course they didn't tell you until we got on the boat exactly where you're going, but he knew when he went to Los Angeles area, he was one Pacific Theater. So they took a troop ship called the USS Sturgis, and it was named after a Missouri Civil War general, and he dug that deep. And he talked about he'd never really been out of state or been home. So that was quite a thing to sail on a troop ship underneath the Golden Gate Bridge in California, leaving to go off in the Pacific Theater. It took them about 2 months, I think he said. And at first they went out escorted, after that unescorted. But he saw dolphins, he saw schools of flying fish. It was fascinating for a young farm boy from Christian County to see that he wrote. It was very interesting. And then to find other people on the ship that he grew up with was really neat too. So he never could sleep below the decks. It was awful. He always slept on top of the decks outside. When he got off the cruise ship, he was mad, and I know because I've been in the Philippines. The draft of the ships was too deep, so they had to climb down with all their gear on these nets to get into small boats to go over. And they check you out, medically check you out, and he had developed sore feet from standing up on the steel decks a lot, so he was sick bay for a while. When he got out, they put him in a headquarters company. He was a runner for officers. And he said, I did that for about a month, and he said, you know, I just don't like this. I was trained to fight and I want to fight. So you can put word out that if you're able, you can join whatever group is going out. So the next day, he got with a group that was going out in the jungle to locate the Japanese, and they're walking down this dirt road, single file, and all of a sudden, Japanese machine gun opens up on them, so you're supposed to split up and they hit in the ditch. The day after that, he got the combat infantry badge for that, the CIB. And I always thought that was very interesting. He got wounded once, but it was slightly, real slight. And of course, in the jungle, it's so thick and the canopy is so dense that you can't see where you were fired at. They just fire and leave and kind of harass you for a while. And another trip, they were walking down the road on patrol, machine gun opened up, my dad jumped in a crater full of water, and other guys didn't because they didn't want to jump in water, and those guys got hit. So as that machine gun is still working, he's peeking up over to see what's going on, and the rounds were hitting in front of him and knocking Grandpa in his face. He got cut on his, never got a Purple Heart, but just kind of an interesting story. So I really enjoyed that museum. It's changed a lot. They have exhibits all the time. The Beyond All Boundaries film is great. Yeah, it's great. It's a 4D movie. I didn't know what 4D was, but they bring the props during this film out of the ceiling of the stage, and they add it to actual video. So like a B-17 bomber, they'll show a formation, I add that. There's a submarine, I can't think of it now, the submarine experience where you go and you get a card, kind of reminds me of Titanic, you get a card, you get a position. So I was, I don't know, lieutenant or something on this submarine, lieutenant commander or something. And at the end, and it's all hydraulics, so your submarine area where you're at, it moves, the steam comes out, because the story of this submarine was this guy surfaced right in the middle of a whole Japanese fleet. And he says, okay, let's submerge low in the water, it's at night, and they torpedoed almost every boat around them, but our torpedoes weren't the best friends. Some of them, if they didn't detect an enemy ship, they would turn around and hit the submarine, and that's what happened. And all those guys perished in that very famous event. It's, you're going into that. It's really neat. So if you ever get a chance, or take kids, it's a great place to go. It's a great learning experience. Next slide. And then I want to feature my first cousin. His name was Keith Forgey Blue. His mother was Maxine, that you saw the pictures of earlier. She liked the Forgey name so much she made his middle name. And he grew up close to where I did, on a farm, east of Ozark. And he graduated from Ozark High School in 1969. Very, very smart guy, very well liked. He spent 2.5 years at Southwest Missouri State, and he just didn't like it. In fact, his college advisor said, you're taking a bunch of blow-off classes. You better go into Parks and Rec or something, because of what you're taking. And so he got discouraged, he quit. But he knew, as his dad was so strict, that he was gonna have to work at the farm. So he tried to find a job real quick. The New Zealand plant had opened up in Springfield, and he got a job there. So when he told his dad, hey, I quit college, he said, well, you know what that means, back to the farm. And they had a dairy, and it all comes across sometimes. And he said, no, I got a job at the New Zealand plant. So he did that for a couple years. He said it wasn't really what he wanted to do. He got up to kind of a low-line supervisor level, didn't like that. And he asked my dad, knowing that my dad was in the military, and he said, well, don't join the Army, you got to sleep in tents. And I heard a lot of veterans say that. And so he was very good at math, so he joined the Air Force as an enlisted guy. Went to basic in San Antonio, Texas, and was assigned out in California, and he repaired radios on aircraft, and all different kinds of aircraft. So one day he was called in by a sergeant after he served 4 years full time, and said, and I'm Airman Blue, congratulations, you now qualify for the GI Bill. I see you have about 2.5 years of college in Missouri. Let's get you enrolled in this community college on base. And Keith said, no. He said, I wasn't really good in college, and I love what I do here. I love the people I work with. It's a great group. And the sergeant, he said he was so persistent, he wouldn't stop. He said, I'll do all the paperwork for you. Just show up to class. So he did. 2 years later, my cousin had his bachelor's degree. And so same sergeant called back in, shook his hand, and said, congratulations, Airman Blue. We need to enroll you in officer candidate school. They'll let you have your degree. And he said, no. And he scored the highest scores of anybody in his group on what he did. So I think that's why they pushed him, and they saw something in him. And I talked him into it. So 2 years later, he got his degree and was paid for by the GI Bill. So Keith thought that was great. So Keith, you get your choice in officer candidate school. It's also depending on what's available, what job you will do. Keith was always interested in aircraft. His girlfriend at the time, her father was a World War II fighter pilot, commander, and he retired as a one-star in the Army Air Corps and then Air Force. And this was after Vietnam. Keith got in, and so he got to decide toward the end of officer candidate school, and his scores, then he qualified for it, to do something in aviation. And we had a cousin at the time, we called him Buddy, but he was Colonel Gunther then, and he was running the navigation school for B-52 bombers in Colorado. And he said, I got to visit him as part of your officer candidate school. He said, so I went up there, he said, you felt just lower the dirt because he was this brand new second lieutenant, wanted to see this full-bred colonel that he knew him from growing up. And Colonel Gunther talked him into being a navigator on B-52 bombers. When Keith flew over 2,200 hours in B-52 Bs and Ds, which is an amazing amount of time in that aircraft. And then he was picked to, he got called in by his commander, who he really liked, and said, he throws his chart at him and said, well, you better study this. You got picked to navigate and fly F-111s, or what's called the FB-1 fighter bomber, an aircraft we had at the time. And he said, Captain, didn't you fly these several years ago in Vietnam? I said, yeah, greatest experience of my life, you're gonna love it. We're shipping you to Plattsburgh, New York. So he did. And he was at Barksdale, which was New Orleans, Louisiana, so get shipped up to a very cold part of the country. By then he was the first lieutenant, and he was the best in his bomb group. He got lots of awards, and he was picked to learn how to fly this F-111. So he gets up there, and he becomes captain. And he flew over 500 hours in those, and it kind of reminds me of the movie Top Gun. He was so good, they gave him the choice to do anything he wanted in the Air Force. Pick your assignment. And he said, you know what, here at this school in Plattsburgh, and that air base has been shut down. He took me there a couple times. They said, you can pick whatever you want to do. And they wanted to keep flying, and he said, nope. He said, this is the best school I've ever been to in the military. I want to now teach these guys that are coming in. The guys coming in were pilots from Australia, because we were selling that aircraft to the country of Australia. And he had a great time doing that. And a friend calls him out from officer candidate school, and he said, Blue, you're going to Pentagon. Or he said, I'm going to Pentagon, I'm taking you with me. And he goes, why me? Well, I want to go to Pentagon. Best career decision he ever made. He said, there's so many promotions there, they had office parties daily. And when Keith went, he was assigned as an XO to generals. His first general was in charge of all the Air Force aircraft. So he comes in, hands in his paperwork, meets a general, And the general, he pulls a drawer out of his desk and gives him this big key ring with like 100 keys on it. And he said, see that door behind my desk, all door, that contains all the information for all the Air Force aircrafts. You need to get in there and start opening doors with these keys and familiarize yourself with all the stuff. And he opens the door and he said it's like a safety deposit box. There's drawers everywhere. He pulls one out. Here's all the F-16s that were ordered and the status, and are they doing new models, F-15, everything, even new aircraft. So he had an amazing career. He would come down here to visit during holidays, and I would get to see him. Next slide. Another picture of him. This is when he was at Plattsburgh. And so after he retired from the Pentagon, he was 24 years. He helped a friend interview. I think he took a year off. He helped a friend interview at Lockheed Martin. And this is something Keith that got to start was the F-22 fighter program. He started that with the general at the Pentagon. The newest fighter aircraft at the time, and it's still in service. And so he helped a friend interview at Lockheed Martin in Marietta, Georgia, and he decided to interview too, and he got the job over his friend. So when he came down to visit, he had the first laptop computer I ever saw, and you would think it was something out of Mars or something. It was the neatest thing you ever seen. And it had pictures of the F-22, the test pilots, videos, the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And he had, they put him in program development, that he actually got to go back to the Pentagon and sell that aircraft back to the military. You know, how many were they gonna build? And what another interesting story he told me was, because I noticed that it's such a very stealthy aircraft, it didn't, at first they didn't have any plans for any armor, no machine gun to defend itself, because they said it'll fly higher and faster than anything out there at the time. And that's what it was designed to do. It was designed to fly above F-15s and just directly in the battle. And if it has to, it'll engage. So he said the generals up there at the time, and his general, I think it was General Richard Myers, last Air Force Joint Chiefs of Staff, said they looked at the plans and they're like, this doesn't have a cannon for defense on it. They said, no, sir, it doesn't need to. And those guys had flown F-4s in Vietnam. And if you remember, an F-4 aircraft, it was the latest fighter, it was very fast, it wasn't real maneuverable, but the weapon systems were not up to the aircraft. So they had to fly very low on these bombing and missile missions, and a lot of them were shot down. And those guys that are now generals, he said, with the hood ornaments on their uniforms, they remember that. They said, we're not going to cut it. Our current fighter pilots, men or women in this aircraft without defense, like we didn't have anything. We had to drop ordnance and try to save our life to get out of here as quick as we could. So I thought that was kind of neat, that experience meant that they changed our whole program. And I got to tour the factory once, and the week I was going was the week of September 11th, and it's 2 days before I was scheduled to leave. And I actually got a hold of Keith that evening, and I said, I can't come, can I? Because, of course, we're all watching what's going on, trying to figure out what's going on. He said, nope. He said, they kicked all us Lockheed Martin employees out and shut the base down, because that was also an Army air base. And they built F-22s and repaired C-130s in this huge complex. And they thought that it was a target. You know, there were several military installations they thought were targets. So I got to go back and actually take a tour of the plant. They were building 4 F-22s in a row. And I noticed before they put the paint on it was kind of a tan color, almost the color of these tables. And then I saw one that had the paint on it. Of course, it was top secret what it was. It looked like a bunch of clouds. So I asked Keith, I said, why does this aircraft look like a bunch of clouds? They said, well, it's up so high, they want it to blend in with clouds up in the sky, and it got be seen. I thought that was interesting, and it was the first aircraft that we built in the United States that had 0 defects when it came off the assembly line. And they had several aircraft in a row, 0 defects. Huge ordeal. And in fact, when he gave me a tour and we got to see these aircraft, they built them in 4 stages. Wire stripping tool in the aircraft when it could cause damage. So when they're done working, they have to fill out a form that says, here's the tool I used, and the tool was numbered inside this big toolbox. And that's how they used to damage the aircraft for getting their tools. If they couldn't find a tool, they shut the plant down, and everybody in that area went in to help find where the fuel was. So that's how picky they were and how well built our aircraft were. And all right, next slide. So here's Keith on the left is when he went to Pikesburg, New York, and he was training to fly in Fort Leavenworth. And the navigator weapons officer sat on the right, the pilot was on the left. And Keith actually ended up wanting to fly that aircraft because he raised this thing that, hey, there's something happening with the pilot. Sure. We don't know what to do. You're not training us to survive. What's the pilot? We could save the aircraft. So he raised enough state. They then trained the navigators to fly. And I think that was during his school, buying F-111. And the picture on the right is he's retiring from the Pentagon. They gave him a medal. Oh, okay. She said 6. Okay. So when General Myers came in, and this picture always reminds me of this story. General Myers came in the Pentagon as a 1-star, and he told everybody at the Pentagon, I want the best XO we have. And they created my custom key. And so he called in and was getting ready for his transition to Pentagon. And when the general came in, he got his 2nd star. When he was serving Pentagon, Keith goes, General Myers, I've been here for 8 years and I've only reached ranking once. Why do you come into the Pentagon and you automatically get another star? General Myers goes, that's about right. Look, you left it right there. You gotta have a pretty decent set to handle. All right. So this is the F-22 program. If you've never seen this aircraft, this is what it looks like. It's amazing. Keith took me to an air show once, sponsored by Lockheed Martin in Panama City, Florida. I got to ride in the Lockheed van, work employees down, and they had a little booth. And Keith took me down the flight line, showed me all this different aircraft. It was awesome because I'm in that once aircraft. And an F-22 was sitting outside the Lockheed Martin tent. Now Lockheed Martin has real money. If I ever saw you for an event here at Free Spartan, I might get 250, 300 items. Keith could order 10,000 one item with how much money they have. So I was just, I got to meet the Raptor F-22 demonstration pilot. He was a kid, he looked like he was 18 years old, and his call sign was Zeke, because his last name was Zelensky, and no one wanted to pronounce Zelensky. So they gave you Zeke, they give you your call sign. And the nicest kid, he would stay at home and goof with us. He was always visiting, shaking a hand. I told my cousin, I said, because I knew the previous F-22 pilot, his name was Max Modi. He got promoted in rank, I think to major, and moved on to the assignment. So they picked this kid as like his place. And I told my cousin, I said, this is amazing. I see why they picked him. He's so personable. He's nice to everybody. He's interested in what you're doing. Keep it last. He goes, that's not the half of it. He said, this kid in the Air Force had either gotten 1st or 2nd in every school he was in. He was that smart. But I was extremely impressed by this kid. So the F-22 is the featured aircraft, so it always flew last in the air show. And I asked Lee, I've seen the pictures, but I never actually saw one, and that's his actual code. It's not in the greatest shape. It also has the ones I was talking about. If they were down somewhere, if they wanted to be seen or they were rescued, they'd turn this code on inside out.
He wasn't a very big guy, was
He wasn't. A lot of pilots, like my cousin Keith, they were very small guys. All right, let's continue. So I read this article in the Christian County Headliner several years ago. I think it was waiting at family pharmacy after going to the doctor, and they would put up headliner articles at their pharmacy in Ozark, and I started reading about Neil Grunwald. It's a fascinating story here. I always thought he was a combat or bomber pilot, but this guy flew more aircraft than anybody I ever heard of. He was a 1940 Ozark High School graduate. He really wanted to go to college. He didn't like the farm life, what everybody else was doing around this area, and he wanted to go so bad. And it was some years after the Depression, so his family didn't have money. They didn't have much at all back then. And he enlisted in the Army Air Corps as an enlisted guy. And he actually ended up being mayor of Ozark from 1982 to 1990. Next slide. And this is just 6 of the 16 aircraft that he actually flew. He never flew in combat, but he has a very interesting story, and I'd like to highlight it here. he was quoted with saying, I didn't have anything to do when I graduated high school. My dad had a farm and it was really hot. And I really wanted to go to college. But because of the depression, we didn't have any money. Out of the 12 boys in my class, this is during World War II time, he said, and the class was a lot smaller back then, wasn't it? 12. And he graduated in 40, a year before my dad. He said 6 out of the 12 enlisted. When he first enlisted, he had no desire to fly. In fact, he passed up an opportunity to fly and regretted it. A fellow came in one day, and then it was Army Air Corps. The Air Force was dropped developed yet. A guy came in and offered to take several of us for a brief ride and fly. So he was an aircraft mechanic. Neil was at the time. I decided right then and there after that flight, I wanted to fly. And take the guy up on it. And they had a special program that if you reached the rank of staff sergeant, you could fly. That you could do dog combat missions, and that's what he ended up doing. He said it was such a glamorous thing to fly, being in the Army Air Corps. And later his wife was quoted, said flying was simply born in him. That was something that he was meant to do. When he graduated, he was a sergeant, and they sent us to a ferry command. They did ferry supplies and troops in different places. Says it wasn't glorious, but it certainly served me well. And he became a pilot in the Air Transport Command and delivered supplies and planes to all branches of the military. And I just highlighted several planes that he flew. His favorite one was the bottom right. Does anyone recognize that aircraft? That is the P-51 Mustang, the greatest fighter plane that we had in World War II. It was one of the fastest. Early P-51s didn't have the bubble canopy where you could see 360 degrees around you, and they had a slower engine in it. And when they mated it with a Merlin, a British-made 12-cylinder engine, it was a little shark. It and external fuel tanks, they could follow bombers all the way to Berlin from different places, and that really helped us win the war. In fact, a famous German general, Erwin Rommel, his staff car was strafed by a P-51 Mustang, and then they watched it do barrel rolls leaving, and he said, we're going to lose the war. He said, that's the most dynamic aircraft I've ever seen. The Germans done some really, really neat things.
He's very fast.
It's super fast. In fact, if I can find it, there was a story that Neil talked about. So he ended up retiring as a colonel in the Air Force. And his last 10 years was in active reserve, 30 years service, which is amazing. The first plane he flew was a PT-19, and that's the one I have up on the left. That's a trainer. I saw one flying in my house the other day. It had to be in a restored aircraft. I couldn't believe it. The next one is a B-34. That's a bomber you don't hear a lot about. That'd be a World War II bomber. Next one is a B-17, top right. The bottom left are the famous C-47s that the airborne troops dropped out of, and others. That's the same aircraft. I've got to sit in one. They are uncomfortable. The next one is a C-24, kind of a cargo type aircraft. You can see how big it is in the nose, carrying a lot of equipment. And then the P-51 Mustang. He flew 16 different aircraft. Now you would have to be really smart to do that, because you have to basically go to schools to learn every one of those aircraft. That was absolutely amazing. He said, I flew during World War II a little bit of everything. My favorite was the P-51 Mustang. I had a job taking planes to people where they needed to be. Many longtime Ozark residents have heard this story or remember when Neil flew a plane right over Ozark. He was in a P-51 Mustang going to Newark, I guess, New Jersey.
Right.
And to cut it on a ship there. It was 1943. I flew over Ozark at 200 feet, and it's very low, at 400 miles an hour. I don't know how he didn't get in trouble for that. You normally would. He said, laughing, had they found me at that time, I probably would have been pressured out of the Air Corps. But he wanted to show off for people in Ozark. Said, I didn't see much combat, but I did get to go to places after they were secured. He went to Tarawa for a few months when the Marines went ashore in 1943. And he writes, someone miscalculated the tide when those guys got off their landing craft, and they had all their equipment on when they stepped off. A lot of it was sunk and drowned. Looking back, he said, I was on the cutting edge of flight. I didn't realize that I was there as much as I was when I was younger. He said Wilbur and Norma White are still living like he was a kid. He stayed in the Air Force because he enjoyed flying, he enjoyed seeing the world. So, big story. And then I also brought, if you notice this uniform right here, with the 5th Army patch. I brought this, and I always bring it for students to show the girls and women. Very rare. There was a group of women pilots that flew a lot. What Neil Grublaw did a lot. They tested aircraft after they were fixed. They flew, get aircraft where it needed to be to replace bombers or fighters, wherever they were in the world. And they were called WACs, and it was stood for Women's Air Corps. These were very adventurous young women, and they were very smart. Several of them were already civilian pilots, which was a little bit rare back then, but they were a huge part of how we won the war. And that is one of the uniforms they would wear. If you look on the left collar tab, it has a picture or a pin of, and that's Athena, the goddess of war. And that's what that pin recognizes. I've never seen another one, and I was able to get a uniform with that on it. And that lady was a captain. And I wish they'd come up with a movie about them, because they were such courageous women. A lot of them died because the aircraft they ran went down. But we don't hear about that a lot. I think that's kind of sad, because they had such a contribution to our country at that time.
Brent,
Yes, sir.
there was one of those lady pilots that lived in Ozark in Kentucky.
Yes. Okay, that was Keith. Yep, that was Keith Blue's wife's mother. I'll listen what that is. What it's called. Her husband. Cool story here. Keith told me one day. He would like his. I guess her husband started Airport South, where they have the small airport, and then later they killed actual helicopter flight school Keith. And Keith would go with him and fly small aircraft, and he thought racing over there. And so how they met was her husband was what do you call it? Not commander of the fighter group. He was in charge of the fighter group. Well, she was a WAC, a pilot, and she came to investigate if your group was crashing a lot of planes or having a lot of accidents. So she came in and presented her paperwork, and he thought she was a joke. So he thought he'll just chew her out and send her on her way. I thought she was a strong lady. And it impressed him so much he ended up marrying her. And she said, look, I'm here to investigate while all your pilots are crashing. I am not leaving. You better give me access to what I need to get this investigation done. I was so impressed he ended up marrying her. And I guess Keith said that, and they lived in Ned Reynolds thought later, the house just north of Riverside, and they got flooded once in a while, right there by the Finland. And he said one time she invited a bunch of the pilots from all over the country, and she sort of went down there to eat at Riverside Inn and visit us there. I thought this was kind of neat.
That Janet Daly wrote a book about these wicked pilots called Santiago Blue,
Santiago Blue.
and she used area as sort of source of information, dedicated the book to.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, Warren was her last name. Paul was talking about the book in reference to the Women's Air Corps pilots. Very deep, very deep. Another person I'd like to recognize is this uniform right here. This is not a local veteran, but I was talking about this guy earlier. Augusta, she's from Illinois. Oh, she late. But this is a grouping that I found from a friend, and this guy's name was Cyril Guswag. And he was a magazine. He was in the European theater, you can tell by the ribbons. And I want to point out that if you're trying to research your relative, this book is one you have to have. And it's called Finding Your Father's War, written by Jonathan Gaughan. And this has a little bit of everything about every branch of service and where you start, where do you research, where you look at.
and it's got the patches, it's got the divisions, it's got a lot of stuff in it. And this one is specific to Army units. But that's a really great book if you're ever trying to look up some research or relative or find a historian. There's another group that I've used that helped me with Cyril Gessler. I have a lot of his stuff. He joined the Army in 1939. He was from Elgin, Illinois. He worked for the Elgin Watch Factory. And he went in as an enlisted guy, became a first sergeant very quickly, and then was sent to officer candidate school. And he helped start the 90th Infantry Division. See the T and O on this patch? That is the 90th symbol, and they said it meant, their motto was tough hombres. They were guys from Texas and Oklahoma, mostly. That's why the T and O right there. This is when he was a captain. He was an officer because his crossed rifles don't have a disc on the back of them, and that means officer. He was at the European theater, and you could see all these stars and arrowhead on that. That 6 of them, that was unheard of for World War II. We call them battle stars or campaign stars. He survived 6 large campaigns. The arrowhead means a beach landing, and he was wounded twice. I have the newspaper articles that his wife kept of him being wounded. He was amazing. He started the heavy weapons group in the 90th Infantry Division. He was the commander of Company M. And just amazing career. And this is the little blue badge right here with the 3 acorns. That's a meritorious unit patch. You get that, the president recognizes you for that combat that your group has done. And they got it 4 times the 90th. And I have the Infantry Division book back here as well. I have 2 of them. He was in this book, and you can see they're advertising. They're like, hey, we did fighting, because there's a combat infantry badge, a CIB at the bottom. And it's neat. If you ever find one for your relative, these are hard to find now. I used to see them more places, but a lot of people kept them or got rid of them, or they're in museums. But this tells, the Infantry Division book will tell every battle that they did, where they go, what they do. They're really neat. And Cyril Gessler was also in the 33rd Division. I have the part marked right next to him as a picture of me. He was in several different divisions. He ended up retiring full-time from the Army as a colonel. He went back into the Illinois National Guard, retired as a brigadier general. Very interesting story. In fact, I've got his combat record just on this with some of his medals and awards. So he's company commander of the 357th Infantry Company M. He got 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. His European medal shows you with arrowhead and 5 battle stars. He started, I said that right, he started in 1926 as a private, made sergeant in 1931. His fighting was in Normandy on June 8th with the 90th Division. He was wounded on the 11th in heavy arrow fighting, which is very brutal. The 90th had 703 casualties and 103 dead in 3 days. Heavy fighting, where he got his 2nd Purple Heart when severely wounded in the neck and chest by German artillery. On September 12th, the fighting in the Mosaic Crossing near Metz, house-to-house combat. He was hospitalized again, returned as a commander of the same unit, and heads to Bastogne and the Battle of the Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge, and also the attacks on the Dragon's Teeth. He crossed the Marne River on the 23rd of March in pontoons with ME-109, which was the first jet aircraft, strafing them as they're trying to get across, all the way to Slovakia. 357th did most of the fighting, but 267 out of 335 days in combat. And he survived. It was just an amazing story. He was in every major engagement of the European theater. And they set up a command in Flossenburg, and he had a command there in a concentration camp. He later volunteered to go to Japan, and I have his items from Japan. It's lists of, since he was an officer, he was given a house and his wife. Everything they were assigned, they were given dishes, silverware. I have all of it on paperwork, and it's all hand typed. It's very interesting. You know about the 102nd Division? And I'm trying to think back to all my notes and stuff, my patches, my books, and I'm like, I don't know a whole lot. Would you share? And he said it was a division that was started around this area. And I learned that it was guys made out from southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. And it was called the Ozark Division. This is their patch. And how they designed it was an O with a rocker and a Z on top of the rocker. That's the 102nd Infantry Division. Very interesting. Like the garrison now, it's a training garrison and it's housed in Fort Leonard. Why my dad was never put in this, I have no idea, maybe because he was trained in artillery, but a lot of guys from the area, they were in the 102nd, and they did some pretty heavy fighting. Their history is pretty neat. They actually were started in 1921. And after World War II, like a lot of the infantry divisions, they were disbanded, but then they came back. They fought in the European theater. They also had a headquarters in Camp Maxey, Texas. They fought in Cherbourg, France. Moved to Boulogne near the Netherlands, German border for additional training. Very interesting. And if you notice the pin, it's what we call a pin below the patch. That's the distinctive insignia. And distinctive insignia would be, it's a good uniform that has it on it. They would be on the collars of the Army. They might have a felt, looks like kind of a patch or sleeve right there. They would have distinctive insignia. If you're in the 102nd Division, you've been there a while, you would get that insignia to be put on your uniform. So if you see a uniform that has some kind of odd-looking pins, it's probably that distinctive insignia. And you can look that up. You'll see information on it as well. Does anyone have any questions so far? I've just been talking away. You guys have been great listeners. I really appreciate it. Any questions, anybody? Love to see Ken share, Tim. Here at the end, I wanted to recognize, and I didn't put one on that I should have, just some notable Nixa veterans. I was talking about this with Paul earlier. Al Michael was a retired principal here spent most of his educational career in Nixa. When I first taught there, he's one of the first people I met when I went to elementary school. And I found out he was a veteran, and over the years we would go to students we knew, ball games and competitions and stuff from Nixa. And every once in a while he would talk. He would mostly drive. And I heard he was in the Navy, and he told me that he was in charge of I think it was in the Mekong Delta area, the river area. He was in charge of a little Navy, just very small base of the gunboats that would come through. And they would stop, and they would be something to eat and refit, and his group of guys did that. And we, very interesting guy. He told me once that, I said, did you ever see Special Forces guys, getting into Special Forces at Commission at the time? He said, yeah. He said, every once in a while, a small group of Navy SEALs would show up. You never know where they came from or what they were doing. Once in a while, they'd catch a wild hog or something, and we'd cook it, and everybody would just have a feast with it. And then he said, all of a sudden, the next day, they were gone. You never know when they came in or when they left. And he had very interesting service after he got out of the Navy. A friend talked him into, they had started a new Navy Reserve Division in Joplin. He was one of the first ones to sign up, and since he was an officer at Gulf Command, a lot of the training and different things they did. And he said when he retired, they took him and several of the retired guys, and I can't remember which battleship, they put him on a battleship, and they got to observe him firing the 16-inch guns and broadside. He said that was pretty incredible. But good friend of mine, great veteran. Blake Scott is a long time, I think, 32 years school board member, was in the Marine Corps. I think he was after World War II, is that right, Paul? And he ended up training people on machine guns. Long-time business owner here in Nixa, did a lot of great things to the school district. Linus Gold was our mayor that helped start Sucker Bay and promote that. He was a World War II veteran. He was commander of the Ozark VFW and with the Nixa America Legion for many, many years. I never did quite find out. I think he was in the Army. I think I knew that. But any service, don't have any details on. interesting to know. Joe Hawkins. If anybody from the Nixa School District remembers Coach Hawkins, yeah, he was a flight pilot. He flew F-4s in Vietnam. In fact, the stadium at now the junior high was named after him. I remember they honored him at the new stadium, or is it the new stadium? New stadium's named after him? Hawkins Field. Yeah, I guess found out he was an amazing fighter pilot in the military. The other one was John Patachak, and he worked for my department, Nixa Police Department, for 20 years. And he was a full-time Navy veteran. He was in during Vietnam. He was a master of arms on several ships, which is in charge of the jail and the police to the ship and stuff. So, does anyone have any questions or comments? Paul?
You were talking about the father went overseas on or a ship called the Sturgis, named after General Sturgis. General Sturgis. General Sturgis was a major in charge of Union troops at the Battle of Wilson's Creek.
No.
So that's a kind of unique connection.
Yeah, I was just fascinated by my dad's knowledge of just historical things like that. We were always doing something, I don't know, related to history, to movies or books. We would share, and amazing. If you folks want to come up and look at some more things, I have some helmets here. I have a World War II GI helmet that has the netting on it that you would put your leaves, twigs, or camouflage in. This is a German helmet, probably fought in the desert somewhere, M35 helmet. And this is a Russian helmet. You can kind of see the differences. You know, one thing that always fascinated students in school, if I can get this off, is the back of this helmet. Do you know what famous movie character that his helmet came from? Darth Vader, Star Wars. See the recognition that Darth Vader's helmet had this shape because George Lucas was a huge military kind of historian. And if you remember, he directed and produced the movie Red Tails. But he got his inspiration from a lot of the weapons in Star Wars from Germany and the helmets. And that's Darth Vader's helmet. It just flare comes out a lot more right there. I always thought that was there.